I worked the late night shift for a while as an EMT on an ambulance that does both 911 calls and generic transport in Southern California. For this call one night, my partner and I, both females, took a lady back home from the ER. She lived in a kind of sketchy neighborhood, and after dropping her off, we drove down a block away from the known Hooker and Pimp Street so that we could finish our paperwork and clean equipment away from that street. We were parked opposing traffic on a curb in the ghetto suburbs at 1 a.m. I had just finished cleaning, and I was standing at the passenger side with the door open. My partner was seated in the passenger seat, still finishing her report. All of a sudden, we heard a girl's voice from a few doors behind us screaming, "No, no, let me go," while a guy yelled, "You can't take her." My partner and I looked at each other, then down the road, because we heard someone's engine revving like an angry lawnmower. All I saw was headlights coming my way, and I took a flying leap into the cab across my partner's lap as she slammed the door shut behind me. Just in the nick of time, too, because the car came within literally inches of our rig. I'd have been crushed if I didn't have the reflexes to jump in. As the car went by, we saw that a bald, tatted-up Hispanic guy was the driver, and he was just casually flicking a cigarette out the window. In the back seat was a girl in her underwear desperately pounding on the window. Meanwhile, on the outside of the car was a dude in his tighty-whities. He had one hand holding onto the roof rack or something, and his feet braced up against the door while he was also punching the window. Not a scene that you see every day. I flicked on the lights and sirens, hoping to scare the driver, and my partner got on the radio telling dispatch a brief rundown and to send cops to our location as we were GPS tracked. The driver was not fazed in the least by our display. He stopped at the four-way stop sign, which was a bit surprising, looked at us in his mirror, flicked the cigarette, and took off. Naturally, we, two unarmed females, gave chase. The driver was cruising, weaving this way and that, trying to shake the guy hanging on in his underpants. We saw the dude fall off and run after the car, and a moment later the girl came flying out of the car in a very ungraceful tuck and roll. The two took off on foot behind one of those giant powered breakers you sometimes see on city streets, while the driver floored it around a corner. We followed around the corner ourselves to try to get a plate number, but alas, he was sporting on advertisements on the plates that a newly purchased car would have. Since he was gone, we presumed that it was safe to get out and do our job and take care of those injured. We hopped out with the aid bag, and my partner kept watch while I ran to the giant power thing, but the nearly naked duo was gone. At that moment, 5 squad cars pulled up, and we gave them the story. They asked where the two were who escaped the car, and we responded that we didn't know. They asked for a description and possible direction, so we told them that if they went left and made another left 3 streets down, where they first parked, they might find them. Maybe 5 minutes later, one of the cops radioed in saying that he found them. Here's the thing though, they denied everything. No car, no kidnapping, no chase. They said none of it happened. Of course, they couldn't explain why they were nearly a block away from their place wearing only underwear. They also couldn't explain their lack of shoes or the large amount of road rash all over them. Since technically they didn't do anything wrong, they had no desire to press charges or be treated by us, and they were let go. That was the night I learned some not only scary but just flat out weird stuff can happen late at night. This happened about 5 years ago. I work at an upscale hotel in one of my state's most affluent suburbs. Like most hotels, we were struggling during the COVID virus. Our rates had been slashed in half to get guests through our door, and our clientele had shifted from upper-class business people to a mixed bag of characters. It was mostly fine, with a couple of notable exceptions, like this one night I worked. I was working overnight alone, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. About 3 hours into my shift, I got a call from room 235. He had a strange voice. It was quite raspy, and he maybe even had an accent. He told me that he couldn't figure out how to work the remote to his TV. I assumed maybe the batteries had died, but he insisted that the remote worked fine, and he just didn't understand how to operate the volume button. I found this strange. I've worked in hotels for 5 years, and have never once encountered someone who didn't understand the TV remote. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, though. Also, working in customer service, you come to realize that people are much, much dumber than you would want to believe they are. Since I was alone at the hotel and not technically supposed to leave the front desk, I told him that if he came down to the lobby, I would gladly show him how it works. This upset him. He grunted and started complaining that our customer service was terrible, and what kind of a hotel wouldn't have an attendant come to the room for something like this? I gave in, as he was only 1 floor up, and it couldn't possibly take that long to show somebody how to change the volume on a remote. Everyone was checked in for the night already, and it wasn't worth the argument over the bad review later. I told him I would be up in just a moment. I knocked on his door and did the customary call out, "Guest services." I could faintly hear him talking to someone, but it was muttered, and I couldn't pick up any distinguishable words. At first, I felt like he was instructing someone else to get the door, and I anticipated it to open shortly after. The talking went on for so long, though, that I wondered if maybe the people in the room hadn't heard me. I was debating knocking again when the deadbolt slowly unlatched. Normally, when I go to a room, the guest opens the door wide and stands to the side to let me in, or at the very least opens the door enough that I can fully see them and they can fully see me. Not this guy, though. He barely cracked the door, opened it maybe only an inch. Even weirder, all the room lights were off. It was entirely dark except for the very faint glow of his TV, which was on, but the volume was turned all the way down. His voice sounded exactly like it had on the phone, raspy and whispered. He was standing behind the door, so I couldn't see him at all. Completely disembodied, he instructed me and said, "Come inside, sweetie." I said nothing and didn't move. I was a small 5-foot-tall woman with a baby face in my mid-20s. The man repeated, "Come on, come inside." He sounded more edgy and more insistent this time. It felt so obviously like a trap that if I wasn't absurdly on edge, I would have been insulted. How naive did he think I was? I pushed the door open, but remained as much in the hallway as possible. I also took the opportunity to reach for the light switch just inside the door. The lights came on, and I finally got a look at him. He was at least 60, white-haired and slim, and he was shirtless. He was wearing pants, but the belt was undone, and the ends were flopping down. I'm not entirely sure because I tried not to look, but I believe his pants were also unzipped. He appeared to be completely alone in the room, with the only piece of luggage being a small black duffel bag. I tried to explain the volume switch from where I was standing awkwardly in the doorway, but he wasn't comprehending it, or at least he was acting like he wasn't. I asked him to give me the remote so that I could show him, but he backed further into the room and said, "You know, it'll be easier for both of us if you just come inside." I was not going to step any further into that room, so I gave him one last description of where the volume button was on the remote and promptly closed the door. I felt like I was potentially going to be in harm's way while I was standing in the doorway and he was actively being a creep, so I left. I got downstairs to my lockable office with my security cameras, which would have allowed me to see him coming. I was just anxious and on high alert. I had decided that if he called again, I obviously wasn't going up, and if he came to the desk, I would have 911 punched into my cell phone just in case. The hotel is 2 minutes from the police station, and there's usually a patrol car hanging out in our shopping center. They show up quickly any time I have to call. The man did end up calling me again that night about 2 hours later around midnight. He wanted me to come up to his room again. This time, I told him if he wanted help to bring himself and the remote to the front desk, and I was not going back up there again. Thankfully, he never came down to the desk, and he didn't bother me for the rest of the night. I work a graveyard shift as a security guard for a recycling yard. When I was new to this job, only my second week of working there, I was given a good scare one night. Basically, every hour I make rounds across a giant recycling yard covered in various precious metals that are broken down and sold. During my shift, I scan various checkpoints and ensure nobody besides me is in the yard or facility. One of my other tasks is to go through some grassy and bushy terrain and over a set of train tracks to take a photo of a warehouse far across. This is to ensure that it is safe and clear. I use a flashlight with 2,000 lumens, so I can see my way through pretty much the entire yard. Well, that one night during my second week, just an hour in on my first round, I went through the grass and over the train tracks. I took the picture of the warehouse and submitted it. Suddenly, I got this intense feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on my neck stood up and I froze. My flashlight was still on and pointed at the warehouse. I slowly turned around and pointed my flashlight behind me. About 10 yards away, I saw a skinny, old, wrinkled white man with a large white beard sitting on a chair. He was looking directly at me. He had dirty jean overalls and I think a Western-style cowboy fedora hat on. Under the overalls, the only thing I could see was his bare skin, no other clothes. Now, I'm a 6-foot, 220-pound man, but he scared the crap out of me when I turned and saw him. I screamed at a pitch that was probably embarrassing, and I accidentally dropped my flashlight out of shock. Mind you, there were thin, tiny metal shards literally everywhere on the ground where I was standing. I couldn't see anything now as the flashlight was facing away from my sight and not towards the man in the chair. All I heard was a quick pace of shuffling and the clanging of metal from footsteps quickly running towards me. Once the metal-crunching footsteps were within maybe 5 feet of me, I heard them quickly veer to the left and past me. Within 3 or 4 seconds, the metal clanging was gone, followed by the faraway sound of rustling bushes. I finally, carefully to avoid cutting myself on shards, grabbed my flashlight from the ground and pointed it towards the sound. The old man was gone, past the bushes to who knows where. I was shaking from adrenaline and fear. I managed to catch my breath and called several emergency contacts. When they arrived, the old man was long gone. I believe that maybe he was just there to watch the active trains move across. I say this because the metal chair was facing the tracks. It's still there, and I took a photo of it, kind of as a memento to remember the time an old man scared the living daylights out of me. I've not seen the old man since, but maybe he still comes and sits on the chair, but is more careful about it. I work in a nursing home, and my schedule consists of days, evenings, and nights. It's a rough transition between days and nights, but everyone that works there has the same shifts, so we just get through them together. The building has about 100 residents with 3 floors, and is shaped like an L, with a north and south wing and the nursing stations in the middle. The 3rd floor currently only has a few residents living there due to construction, with one of the wings completely shut down because they're ripping out the walls. Due to only a few residents being on that floor, only one nurse is required to be on duty on that floor. I've worked the night shift alone on that floor many times, and never really experienced anything scary or weird. Sure, it's creepy and dark at night, but that was it. I've also never believed in the paranormal at all. I had the mindset that I had to see it to believe it. A few of my coworkers over the years had talked about how the 3rd floor was supposedly haunted, and they would hear knocks at night and see weird things. I was always intrigued to hear about it, but would always just laugh it off. But one night a few weeks ago has really started to change my mind. I was sitting in the nursing station watching movies and playing on my phone. I had just done my rounds and had answered a call bell. I had felt off that night and constantly had the feeling of being watched. I also kept on thinking that I was seeing things out of the corner of my eye. The next part is hard to explain, but I'll try as best I can. As I was sitting there, suddenly a shadow dropped from the ceiling and hovered over me, but by the time I realized what I was seeing, it was gone. My heart jumped, and I jumped out of my chair. There was no way that it would be a shadow from anything or a car passing by, as the only window looks out into the forest with nothing but trees for miles. After a few moments, I calmed down and left the nursing station to go check on my residents. Nothing seemed amiss, and none of them were awake, except for the little old lady at the end of the hallway watching her TV shows. As I walked back over to the nursing station, I was sure that I saw feet or a shadow moving under the crack of the door leading to the wing that was closed for construction. I opened the door just to make sure that it wasn't a wandering resident from another floor, which happens quite often, but there was no one there. I walked back to the nursing station freaked out, still feeling like somebody or something was watching me. I settled back into my chair and tried to watch TikTok videos to get my mind off of it. I was sitting with my back to the window, facing the door. After about an hour of watching videos, I glanced at the clock. It was 3:03 a.m. I remember being slightly annoyed, as my coworker had promised to come up at 2:50 so I could have my break and go out to my car to have a smoke. Suddenly, I heard 3 knocks on the window behind me. I jumped up and looked out of the window and saw nothing there. Flight mode took over, and I just darted down the hallway, running into my coworker who was just coming up the elevator. Now, bear in mind I was on the 3rd floor, which is pretty high up. There was no stairway, tree, or ladder outside that window, so it was impossible for a person to be outside knocking on that window. I immediately asked my coworker if she knocked or heard any knocking, and she said no. She could see how shaken up I was and offered to switch floors for the remainder of the shift. I was very thankful, as being on the 2nd floor means you're with another nurse, so I wouldn't be alone. I went out to my car and had a few smokes just to try to calm down. I talked to the nurse on the 2nd floor, and she didn't seem too surprised. She's heard knocking up on the 3rd floor and had seen and heard weird things that she can't explain. A lot of people have died up there, and after that night, I honestly don't know what to believe anymore. I've never felt fear like I did that night, and I've since worked a few night shifts up there and didn't experience anything like that again. Could it be that I was just tired? I don't know, but I'll never forget how I felt that night. I was 19 at the time this took place. I was a Marine and I was on my first deployment to Afghanistan. Not too far from my platoon's patrol base was this structure that looked like a castle. Through interpreted conversations with locals, we were able to determine that they believed it was built by Alexander the Great. Whether this was true or not, I will never know, but this place did look ancient. So being Marines, we did the only thing that we thought was prudent at the time. We went out on patrol with the intent of setting up an observation post inside this structure. We took our Afghan border police with us. When we got close to the structure and our Afghans figured out what we were up to, they refused to go any further. Before they left, they kept repeating the same word over and over. I don't remember what the word was in their language, as this was a decade ago and there's no way I can remember that. But what I do know is that they were trying to warn us of evil spirits. We went in anyways, without our Afghans, with the intent of staying there overnight. This place was basically an ancient fort with mud or clay brick walls on 4 sides, with a building in the middle. So we set security, made sure we had comm checks with our patrol base, and that they had an updated position report on us so they knew where we were in case we got into trouble. Darkness fell, and not long after, I went up to take my turn on the wall with my friend. Our job was to watch for anyone that might be trying to sneak up on us or any other Taliban-related shenanigans. Not 20 minutes into our shift was when weird stuff started going down. The entire time there on the wall, I felt like I was being watched from all sides. I turned to see a figure walking along the wall not too far from where we were sitting. I say walking, but it was a robed figure that looked to almost be floating. I turned to my friend to see if he too saw what I did, and he was getting his night vision back on, which was turned off as it was his turn to rest, and when he looked, the figure was gone. We didn't see anything else after that for the rest of our shift. We uneasily finished and went to rest, where I ended up dozing off at some point. I don't know what happened next, but I awoke to a completely black figure literally squatting on my chest. When I went to yell for help, nothing came out, and it was like I had a hand over my mouth. I reached for my knife since I was a machine gunner and I couldn't just grab my machine gun, and I felt like something was pinning my arm to the ground. I tried to squirm free and couldn't move, so I bit down as hard as I could on what felt like a hand in my mouth. At this point, whatever weight was on me instantly disappeared and I could move and talk again. By that point, I was freaking out, and my brothers who were around me saw me. My training had kicked in, and I was trying my best to keep quiet and not pass out because I was hyperventilating. My squad mates calmed me down, and after telling them what happened, they all admitted to having the creeps. They also admitted to the feeling of being watched the entire time we were there. None of us could sleep, and we all basically sat back to back for the rest of the night when we weren't on watch. We were pretty freaked out, and so every noise and rustle in the wind made it even worse in the total silence of that ancient fort in the ancient desert. If you haven't experienced the silence of an open desert in a part of the world where there's absolutely zero light and noise pollution, then I suppose it can be hard to understand this. But any noise in a place like that in the middle of the night, in total darkness when you're already alert to sounds of the enemy, is just about the scariest thing anyone can ever experience. I will never experience that kind of fear in my life again, ever. As soon as the sun came up, we left. Everyone was scared, and none of us spoke about it again to each other, as many other patrol that night also had strange, unimaginable encounters happen to them. We never went back to that area again, and didn't make it a permanent observation post for obvious reasons. I still suffer from nightmares and sleep paralysis because of my personal experience that night. The scariest part of this whole thing is that I know it was probably just in my head what happened while I was sleeping, but it felt very real.